Welcome to the Contract Podcast. I'm your host, Amber Simpson. Today, I'm excited to interview someone who has spent her career sitting in rooms where she often had to translate herself to the world, and now has dedicated her work to making sure others don't have to. Our guest, Felicia M. Davis, founder of Eunoia Thinking, a name rooted in the Greek concept of beautiful thinking, and the author of the soon-to-be-released book, Autism, Not Attitude. She lives and leads with both autism and ADHD, and she brings over 15 years of experience, from nonprofits to leading global teams at a Fortune 500 financial firm to her present work, helping organizations unlock the full competitive advantage of neurodivergent minds. Felicia, welcome to the Contract Podcast.
Thanks for having me on today, Amber.
Well, before we get into the work, I want to start with you, and I know our listeners want to get to know you a little bit more. Now, you were diagnosed with autism and ADHD as an adult while you were already working at a Fortune 500 company. What was that moment of diagnosis like? Did it feel like a disruption, or did it feel like finally having language for something you'd always known?
You know, it's interesting because what kind of tripped me over to getting the diagnosis was, life wasn't going terrible, right? I was already working at a Fortune 500 company, but I'd kind of gotten stuck. I was thriving in my role as a call taker, but couldn't seem to transition into leadership. I was definitely running into conflict with my peers. And I remember going in to get tested. And it's the weirdest feeling on the planet, right? The testing itself feels very odd for anybody who's ever done it. Definitely feels like something made for children.
Hmm.
And you go, you get the testing, and then you just sit at home and wait for 3 weeks for it to come in the mail, which is a very weird thing in this fast culture that we live in today. And I get the results, and I completely bypassed that they diagnosed me with ADHD originally. But I read the words that I have autism. And it's almost like finding out you're pregnant and you think you might be. And there's this flood of emotions that comes with it. Like you now have words to describe what's going on. You have something that you can say, I definitively get this, but you also realize not everyone in the population understands. And it isn't something, just like in a woman's first trimester of pregnancy, you can't tell that she's pregnant.
Yeah.
And so you have to make the decision, do I explain to people why I'm feeling different? Or do I take on the extra work to just go, I can't do this and some people are going to judge me for it. And so it's very empowering to have that diagnosis and understand it. But there's a flood of emotions that came with it.
Wow. I love that analogy. Well, many of us that are mothers can certainly relate to them. Now, just talk about your book just briefly. It's called Autism, Not Attitude. That title is doing a lot of work there. What is it named that needed to be named?
A lot of people who don't know that someone has autism, like myself, if without me telling, most people have no idea that I have autism or ADHD. And when you don't think that, and I interact with you, people would come up to me and say, Hey, Felicia, you want to grab a coffee? And historically, I would have looked at you and said, No, thanks, Amber. I don't drink coffee. Period. End of sentence. And I'm extremely confident in it because I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, I don't drink coffee. However, for the rest of the world, you feel like I have rejected you completely for whatever the actual offer was of, hey, I want to network. I want to, want to hang out. I want to talk about parenting. Or if it's somebody, who's potentially asking me out on a date,
Mm,
whatever it could be, my answer
mhm.
was always the same. And so it comes across as though you have a lot of attitude, or perhaps you're very methodical. I have a lot of very precise routines. There's a lot of things I will do to help reduce the stimuli in an environment.
Mhm.
So a lot of people don't think about it, but fluorescent lights flicker and those cause migraines. So about halfway through the day, I end up with a migraine if I'm not wearing sunglasses, if I don't have a hat that's helping to block out some of it. It's like working with a strobe light all day long.
Hmm.
And most people don't think about that. And that's just one thing. Then add in the perfume or cologne that someone's wearing, the lotion, outside noises, and all of those things become so much that you become irritable and grouchy. And it can come across as attitude because I'm extremely picky. And it's like, nope, I've told you this. This is what it is. And it's like, well, why does she think that she's somebody special?
Mhm.
And you realize that individuals who have autism, it's not about trying to control everybody else. It's about trying to manage the environment so that our brains can continue to work and we can relax. If not, you're taking 70% of my capacity just to manage my environment. Imagine how much more work you'd get out of me if all of that could be mitigated in a way that my brain could actually do what it was designed to do.
Powerful. And so I want to take that as we go into contextualizing neurodiversity in the world of work and what leaders need to know. Now, the numbers are hard to ignore. An estimated 15 to 20% of the global population is neurodivergent, encompassing autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, and so much more. And unemployment for autistic adults runs as high as 85%, representing, as researchers put it, a staggering act of economic self sabotage. And yet, neurodiverse teams are 30% more productive than neurotypical ones and make fewer errors. And your own firm at United Thinking's consulting framework notes that 80% of workplace accommodations cost nothing at all. And you mentioned a few of your own that you've used. So let's put this in the workplace. You, as the consultant, you coming into an organization and say neurodiversity is a competitive advantage. What's the reaction that you get, and how might you move a skeptical leader from seeing neurodivergence as a liability to seeing it as a strategic asset?
The first thing is if go back to those numbers you referenced, if it's 20% of the population, that's one out of every five people, which means, that they either have autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, or a combination. And so even small organizations are impacted by neurodiversity. If you're not leveraging it and providing proper support, you're only getting 30% of what I'm capable of doing. And if we're running into team conflict and individual conflict because people think that I have attitude instead,
Mhm.
then you're missing out. And we end up being the individuals who are put on PIPs, performance improvement plans. We're the individuals that are labeled hard to work with and lacking autonomy and not a team player. When in reality, most individuals want to, they're just not entirely sure how.
Yeah.
And so when I'm working with businesses and leaders, one of the first things to do is say, do you have this, or this happening? And they do. It's impossible to find an organization where you don't have communication impacts, where you don't have individuals, again, one in five. So it's a very large percentage. But what works for neurotypicals is not the same thing that works for somebody who's neurodivergent. And the other thing that you're working on is you're right. 30% of the teams are 30% more productive when they are neurodivergent. And it's learning to not be afraid of that this individual is going to thrive here and do really well for your organization. But don't be surprised if they're unsure what to do at a happy hour.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's finding that balance of here's where I'm going to coach you so that you can engage in a happy hour, but also helping the rest of the team to understand that you have different skills. We'll talk about high IQs when we talk about high EQs, emotional intelligence versus, um, and if you think about the two of those, you can have somebody who's extremely intelligent, but if they're lacking the emotional intelligence, we have a problem. So it's how do you balance that out? Or how do you build symbiotic relationships between your teams to say, this is your strength, this is mine. I would never take someone who's an amazing accountant and tell them, I need you to sit at the front desk and I need you to do customer service all day. There are some who might be able to do it, but a lot of people who go into accounting prefer to work alone and work with
Mhm,
numbers and work in
mhm.
very concrete things. And that's okay because we need people who work differently. That's why we have so many different job types. And so it's really starting with the this is what you need and you've already got it. Now let's leverage it.
I love that because you're hitting on something that I'm very passionate about is diversity in the workplace. And it's beyond some typical or traditional, let's say, definitions or thoughts of what that means. And this is something that you bring comes up into your work. It's a phrase that you use in consulting. I love this. It's not about DEI, it's about business and employee ROI. And that's a deliberate reframe, especially given today's political climate around inclusion programs. So, talk to me about that choice of language and why it matters. And you started to talk about the power of having this diverse team, but go a little further there.
I like that you brought that up because it's less about DEI not being important and
Mhm,
more about getting to what the root of DEI really was, because it is about that return on investment. It's not about hiring more women in the workforce. It's not about hiring individuals who have autism or are neurodivergent or people of color. Instead, it's really about how do we build equity, not equality, equity.
mm,
And so I like to put this in the context of glasses. If you're a leader and you realize that one of your employees is really struggling and they can't see the screen, and you go, oh, wait a minute, you might need glasses. Nobody would be offended by that comment. And nobody walks around and goes, well, wait a minute, Amber, you're wearing glasses and I'm not. Well, that's not fair. I should be wearing glasses. If we both wore glasses and had the exact same prescription, it wouldn't help either of us because somebody who has 20/20 vision doesn't need glasses. Somebody who's farsighted needs a different prescription than somebody who's nearsighted. Some
mhm,
people need bifocals. And that's acceptable, right? Just because our
right.
whole point is to get everybody where we can see, ideally at 20/20. And whether you use contacts, glasses, LASIK surgery, whatever that might be. And so it's the same thing when you're talking about business and employee ROI. We're just talking about providing supports that are, again, they most of them don't cost anything, like putting an agenda in a meeting, working with an individual to figure out why they're doing something a certain way, or if they say, hey, I can't attend a happy hour. And instead of saying, well, it's an expectation, why don't you ask a little bit more about why? Maybe instead of a happy hour, maybe you turn it into, a quiet coffee and tea afternoon break where you can still build that camaraderie, but it's specifically designed for small groups in a less stimulating environment. You know, something where you're not worried about TVs buzzing and humming and flickering in the background and food that, people may have massive aversions to. And if you think about it, these changes don't just impact someone who's neurodivergent. When you're focused on the ROI and you make these small changes and you're mindful about it, for example, a happy hour, there's a lot of people who don't drink for religious reasons, for medical reasons, for personal reasons. You have ostracized an entire group of your organization
Yeah.
just by doing that. And I'm not saying you should get rid of all happy hours, but think outside the box. Think about all the people who that might not work for them.
Hmm.
So, how are you actually being inclusive to build those teams? Because that's what you're looking for. Because you know that that diversity of thought, whether it's from neurodivergent minds to economic backgrounds to cultural differences, it's all helpful, but it's only helpful if we figure out how to do it cohesively.
Absolutely. And as many of our listeners are HR professionals, leaders, or aspiring to be so, I want to get a little bit tactical, practical here. I want to spend some time on what leaders actually do because there is a gap. There are many, many well-intentioned organizations, and they know they need to be more inclusive, right? That's the mantra, and particularly including neurodivergent employees. but they don't know what that looks like on a Tuesday morning, right? And your book and your consulting work are both closing that gap. So let's talk about one competency, one condition that is really the foundation for so many other things, and that's psychological safety. And it's a term that gets used in a lot of leadership conversations, but for a neurodivergent employee, it might mean something very specific and different from what a neurotypical leader may assume. So, what does psychological safety actually feel like for, say, an autistic person at work, and what breaks it?
So, psychological safety is just when a person feels safe enough to share and feels like they get the support that goes with it. So rather than being judged for sharing or, told they're stupid or anything that would have negative consequences, it's feeling like I can share and then either the other party will work to understand it, or if they already do understand it, providing that support.
Mhm.
So if you're someone who's autistic, feeling comfortable enough to say, hey, what's the dress code for the meeting? Do we have to have cameras on? What's the expectation? How long does the camera need to be on? Do I need to be looking directly into my camera or should I be looking at the screen? Should I be looking at the individual? They may have a lot of questions that to the rest of the world feel intuitive. And in the book, I actually describe it as if somebody were to ask you, how do you breathe? Because if you think about it, unless it's a little child asking you that, you just intuitively do it. And I go, well, yeah, but how do you breathe when you're asleep? How do you breathe when you're exercising? How do you breathe when you're eating or drinking? Right? You're cutting off your air passage. How's this even
Mhm.
possible? And for everybody else, this you're like, well, you just do it. I can't help you with that. You just do it. Well, we say that, but actually, you can help with that. If you have ever had a yoga instructor, if you have ever had a coach, if you've ever done music, there are tons of exercises out there just for breathing
Yeah.
to improve your breathing. We do this a lot. It's just not as common for, everyday life. And so when you have leaders that are willing to say, "Oh, wow, this feels weird and different and to me this is just intuitive," it does make you stop and think and go, "Huh, how would I explain that to someone else?" And maybe they don't have the answer, but finding someone who does and then walking individuals through that. And that's where you really build that psychological safety to say, "Wow, I've never heard it from that perspective. Let me see what I can do to help." And that's where you start building that.
I really love that because it's about being curious without being intrusive. It's about being truly human, thinking of others as a part of this beautiful mosaic, right, of who we all are, and not just your own personal lens and expecting that everyone has the same worldview as you, right? So you mentioned something, asking those questions, being curious, which I think is extremely powerful. But we also know that that involves potentially a level of vulnerability that some leaders may not feel comfortable with exercising. So, in your experience and in the consulting that you've done and things you've observed, what would be maybe one of the most damaging things a manager can do without realizing it to a neurodivergent employee? And what is like one practical piece of advice or food for thought that you would want a leader to take home today and begin to implement?
I think one of the most damaging things leaders do very unintentionally is being dismissive of requests that they feel are ridiculous
Hmm.
and either just telling the individual, yeah, sure, do whatever you want, because that doesn't actually make you feel okay. If
Hmm.
I walk in and say, hey, these lights are bothering me, is it okay if I wear a hat or sunglasses? And they go, yeah, sure, do whatever you want. I don't feel like I have permission right now. I feel like I'm eventually going to get in trouble because I'm going to do something unexpected that you didn't mean. If you
Mm.
tell me I can wear any hat I want, I own a pirate hat. I own a pith helmet. And I'm not kidding. I own baseball caps.
Uh-huh.
These are things that you may not think about. And somebody like me, if I wear that, and then you're like, well, not that. It's like, well, wait, 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 you said whatever. And it's very damaging when either you are so accepting, just we'll do whatever, it's fine. And then we end up making social faux pas that then have to be corrected because we don't like
Mhm.
making mistakes. We're asking your help for a reason. And or the reverse side of that, where managers are like, no, you absolutely cannot wear a hat. You can't do any of that. None of us really like the lighting in here. We just deal with it. And so either one is damaging
Yeah.
because you're still putting that individual in an uncomfortable situation that is going to cause their brain to go into overload. And I think the one thing that I would ask every manager to do differently is really start with that. Start by assuming good intentions.
Mm.
Start by assuming that the employee you're working with wants to be a good employee. They're reaching out because they need help.
Yeah.
Or if they've done something and you now need to go reach out to them, they just need your help to do it. And so don't start with you did this intentionally and you're just a terrible person. Start with figuring out, I bet they didn't realize, and go into the why. That curious mindset.
Love it. I can continue talking with you all day long because you have such a wealth of knowledge from your personal experience, from your research, and you have a full range of offerings. And I definitely want our listeners to take note and know how they can find you. So let's talk about your thinking, what you offer, who you serve rather, what that engagement typically looks like, whether someone is a leader, HR professional, or just interested in themselves as, they're discovering that they're neurodivergent and looking for coaching. What does working with you look like?
Question. So, your thinking was started really to level the playing field and bring in that ROI. I mean, my bachelor's degree is in economics. I'm always focused on how are we getting that return on investment? You should be seeing results. So we work specifically with businesses of all sizes to start with, the foundations of removing the communication barriers that are coming up, working to do that team building, whether it's office etiquette, and then also developing the individuals. Recently I was at the Mensa annual gathering for American Mensa and gave a talk to over 150 Mensans. And these are individuals with very high IQs. And it goes back to that 85% are underemployed or not employed. And it's because of things like missing proper adaptations that their brains can work incredibly well, but there's all this extra stimuli that's too much. And
Mhm.
so I work with companies, and leaders to teach them this is what it might look like. And here's the framework to do it. And our framework, Unoya, is actually based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's how you achieve all of those, which is a psychological concept, how you achieve all of those to get the best performance out of your employee who's going to do better. And then subsequently, because they're doing better, your business is then going to thrive. And then individuals who are neurodivergent, we do have coaching specifically for them or just individual leaders who are looking to bring it up to that next level of, I guarantee you I've got at least two or three people who are neurodivergent and I think they're brilliant and I love them, but I'm not really sure what to do. And so we have individual coaching packages just for that to help bring that leadership up to that next level.
Love, love, love that. So let's plug your book, Autism Not Attitude, and it's going to be available soon. So I definitely want you to tell us where we can get that book. But who is it for? And what do you want someone to walk away knowing after they read it?
So the full title of the book is Autism Not Attitude: Embracing Neurodivergence at Work and in Relationships. So this book was written between myself and then my co-author, Nancy Wayne Scott, who's been working with individuals with autism and neurodiversity for well over 30 years. And so we combine the clinical side with the lived business experience. And so our focus is really on having a tool for leaders, for HR, for neurodivergent individuals themselves, and whether it's spouses, friends, colleagues, just to understand as kind of a peek behind the curtain of this is how a neurodivergent mind works. Here's some of the struggles they're going to run into and how you can overcome them. And here's the power behind it. And it's filled with examples from, comedic social faux pas in the business world to how I was able to take metrics of, things that I was doing, for example, as a call taker, that we were then able to extrapolate over an entire department of almost 100 associates and save FTEs across the board. And it's how you can leverage that power, not just at the individual level, but scale it up.
Powerful stuff. Where can we find it?
You can find the book on Amazon and it will be in Barnes and Noble. There's a few early release copies available right now that you can find from unioyathinking.com, my website. And then the rest of them will all be available on October 6th, including the ebook and the audio version as well.
Fantastic. And you really are a trifecta when it comes to your skills and your services, because the third piece is you're a professional speaker. You speak on topics including neurodiversity in the workplace, leadership through the lens of neurodivergence, and creating truly inclusive cultures. So if an organization wants to bring you in, say for a keynote, a workshop, or an on-site or virtual event, how do they reach you?
For my keynote speaking presentations or any workshops, you can reach me at FeliciaMLDavis.com.
Fantastic. So for all of our listeners, if you're ready to make neurodiversity a genuine competitive advantage, not a compliance exercise, Felicia M.L. Davis is exactly who you want in the room. Felicia, thank you so much for being here with us today. This conversation is one that I know our listeners are going to return to. But before I let you go, one final question, and I ask a version of this to all of my interviewees. What do you want the neurodivergent employee who is maybe listening to this right now, the one who has spent years masking, adapting, and wondering if they'll ever truly belong at work? What do you want them to know?
I want you to know that you're seen, that you're valued, and that while you may not fit in just like everyone else, you're not supposed to. We're all unique. And that is truly a gift that I can't even begin to describe. So acceptance is more about, hey, we're all a little different, and that's okay, but there's also immense value in that. And that's actually what makes you belong.
And on that note, I thank you so very much again for sharing your time with us today. Remember to go to check out Felicia. You can find her on LinkedIn at her Unoya Thinking website. And of course, find that book. It's going to be available soon, Autism, Not Attitude. So thank you again for tuning in to another episode of the Contract Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, and visit thecontractpodcast.com or listen wherever you get your podcasts. We'll catch you next time.